Welcome to AARP Fact Tracker. My name is Larry Lipman. I'm a AARP volunteer in Northern Virginia. I'm a former executive editor for state news for the AARP Bulletin, a former contributing editor to AARP the magazine, a former newspaper reporter in the Cox Washington Newspaper Bureau, a former adjunct professor of journalism at George Washington University, and a former president of the National Press Club. There are some folks who may think that I am a has-been. Today, we're going to be talking about sorting fact from fiction online. Some people are still joining us. We welcome you. And right now, everybody should be on mute. We'll have a chance later on to ask questions. But if you have questions during the presentation, questions and comments, please put them in the chat box, and we'll get to as many as possible at the end of the presentation. I want to remind everybody that this is a judgment-free zone. People are free to make their comments whatever way they feel, okay? And so we're going to give everybody a chance. We're going to talk about sorting fact from fiction. When I was growing up, and probably when you were too, there was a saying that I heard frequently, and it was, don't believe everything you read in the newspaper. I learned that firsthand during a summer job when I was in college, when I worked for a small newspaper in Montgomery County, Maryland. And one of my jobs each day was to take stories that had appeared in the Washington Post, the Washington Daily News, and the Washington Star about Montgomery County and boil them down into short, little brief items. And what I discovered when I was doing that was that sometimes the three stories would have different facts. And one of my jobs was to sort out what was right and what was wrong. So I learned that just because it's in the newspaper, you can't always believe it. But today we're going to be talking about online. And when we talk about online, we're not talking about just social media such as Facebook or Twitter. We're also talking about emails. Okay, so let's see what we know about what's fact and what's fiction online. Well, here's a quote from President Abraham Lincoln. It said so on the internet, so it must be true. And I guess we can just end the conversation right now, because if Lincoln, Honest Abe, said it, then they don't need to go, wait a minute. Abraham Lincoln died in 1865. Photography had only been around for about 25 or 30 years. The internet wouldn't be around for about another 100 years, and the World Wide Web, as we know it, wouldn't be around for about another 130 years. So obviously, Abraham Lincoln never said this about the internet. But this is an example of misinformation. It's something that's been around for centuries. The difference between now and then, however, is that misinformation is more easily created and can be disseminated faster and farther than ever before in history. Some of it, like this quote from Abraham Lincoln, is relatively harmless. But let's take a look at this. This is the cotton ball diet, which is a real online trend. And obviously, if you ate cotton balls as your diet, it could have serious health consequences. And we're all connected. All of us on this call are connected. So nothing really is safe from misinformation. Rapidly evolving situations such as the coronavirus, the vaccine, elections, disasters, tremendous news events, all of these can create confusion and fear, which can lead into misinformation. The problem is misinformation is easy to create, it's easy to spread, and it's incredibly difficult to control. One study from the International Fact-Checking Network found that a false story spread 5 times as far as the follow-up correction. AARP wants to empower you in every facet of your life. Health, career, financial decisions, caregiving. Today, we're going to try to give you some of the tools that you can use to be a better digital citizen. This is important to us because it can have a big impact on our members. According to a 2017 Knight Foundation survey, approximately 70% of Americans over 50 said that, quote, the spread of inaccurate information on the internet is a major problem. AARP's collaboration with Mediawise allows us to bring you this program today. Mediawise is based out of the Poynter Institute for Media Studies, and originally it was created to help teens sort fact from fiction online. This nonprofit, nonpartisan program, let me repeat that slowly. This nonprofit, nonpartisan program has expanded to work with college age, first-time voters, and now adults 50 and over. And while misinformation is a serious topic, we're going to try to have some fun along the way. Here's what we're going to be talking about today. Why misinformation is created, why it spreads and spreads so easily, what are some red flags that you can watch for, and how can you verify information for yourself? At this point, let me share an adage that I used to tell my journalism students at George Washington University. If your mother says she loves you, check it out. I hope you will bring that kind of skepticism to everything you see online, whether it's on social media or an email. Be skeptical of what you see. So, what is misinformation? According to the, hold on a second. I'm sorry, I lost a page. The Merriam-Webster Wikipedia defines misinformation as false or inaccurate information, such as that cotton ball diet or the picture of Abraham Lincoln. And as I said, it's hard to get a handle on it. It's easy to create and it's easy to spread. So how much misinformation do you think is out there? We're going to open up a poll right now. What percentage of people in the United States do you think have shared misinformation online? And here's some of the choices: 25%, 50%, 75%, and 90%. I'm going to leave that open for about a minute, give you a chance. I'll take a drink.
All right, Larry, it looks like the majority of folks have voted, 75% have.
Okay, well, according to the Stanford History Education Group, more than half of Americans have shared something online that ended up being false. And we had pretty much a tie there between 75% and 90%. Can we stop that sharing?
Yes, I've stopped it, and you just want to close it in your on your screen.
All right, let me see if I can close it. It won't close. Okay. Is it still showing on my screen? Because I can't. Oh, no, I see. Okay, got it. I got it, I think. Okay. I don't want to scare you off of being connected to the internet, because the internet can definitely be helpful. If you're looking for information about caregiving, about healthcare, about entertainment, it's there on the internet. The internet is like having an encyclopedia at your fingertips. And of course, you can be connected to friends and family at home, around the corner, around the country, and around the world. You can take care of important business through connectivity. But there's a downside. Let's talk about that. That has to do with the kinds of content that you might find on the internet. According to the Pew Research Center, 9 out of 10 American adults claim that they have come across made up information and news often or sometimes. Here are some of the types of content that might be suspect. Imposter content. That's when somebody pretends to be somebody else, or a false news site. Manipulated content is stuff like clickbait or outrageous headlines. Out of context information is something like that photograph of Abraham Lincoln's statue with a incorrect caption. And disinformation. This is more pernicious. This information is false information that has been created and spread deliberately, quote, in order to influence public opinion or obscure the truth, according to the Merriam-Webster definition. And then, of course, there are scams. Somebody's trying to get your money. And the internet is a hotbed of scams. So what's behind this information? Why might somebody create a post like this? I'm going to ask you to put your thoughts in the chat box as we look at this post a little bit more closely. Here's a post from John Dokes that was posted 3 hours ago. So sad. Local park demolished, replaced with parking lot. You can almost hear Joni Mitchell. Inside source says city sure to destroy at least 5 more this year. So why might somebody create a post like this? Now, this is not a legitimate post. This is something that we created as an example of misinformation. So Nancy and Trudy, what do we have any comments about why this might be created?
Larry, I have one comment that says to be helpful. The second one says to create anger.
Aha, okay, good, yeah. Any others coming in? Okay.
Political reasons.
Political reasons, yeah. Okay. Well, let's go to some reasons why misinformation is created. One reason, of course, is money. You see, advertising drives much of what's on the web. And the more times a story about parks is shared, people may be upset, as one of the people commented, said, make people angry. If you get angry about the likelihood that parks are being taken down and turned into parking lots, you may be more likely to share that. And the more time something is shared online, the more profitable it can be to the advertisers who are on that website or on that platform. It sometimes could be, as you said, as somebody said, just to make people angry, to create chaos. We sometimes call that trolling. You may think that the trolls are only under the bridge or on the Hobbit, but trolling exists on the internet. People are trying to just stir the pot. And again, as someone else said, they could be trying to push an agenda. It could be a political agenda, a social agenda. They may be trying to get you to like or not dislike a candidate or a cause. It could be on something like wealth taxes or Social Security. Somebody's pushing their own beliefs. They might even create entire Facebook posts that look legitimate, but they're pushing a false agenda. And of course, they are sometimes trying to take your money. So be careful about stuff like GoFundMe sites. Many of them are legitimate, but some of them can be suspect. Again, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. So that's what's behind some of it, but why does it spread so easily? Well, as somebody said, we care. We want to help people. Misinformation often builds on our own beliefs and assumptions, and we don't even realize that it's misinformation. We may think to ourselves, I'm not going to fall for that. I'm not going to be suckered into that. I'll recognize misinformation when I see it. But often we don't even realize it. Misinformation online can spread easily. According to the Pew Research survey, 52% of Americans have shared misinformation, and a vast majority of them didn't know it was misinformation when they shared it. We share because we care. We want to help people. We may see something that may be a miracle cure for a disease, and we want to let everybody know. In fact, it may be bogus. We could be fooled by official-looking posts that we think everybody ought to know about it. So that's one of the reasons those are some of the reasons that we share. Okay, let's go to another poll. How many false posts did Facebook remove during the first month of the coronavirus pandemic? There's the poll up there. Now that would have been last April, almost exactly a year ago from now. And the answers are 500,000, 50,000, 5 million, or 50 million. Well, it looks like the answers are pretty well spread.
I think everyone who wanted to vote has voted, Larry. I'm going to end polling now.
Well,
And
interestingly enough, only 6% of you got the correct answer. The correct answer is a staggering 50 million false posts. So what are some of the red flags that we can look for? Let me close this on my screen. All right, so here's this post from John Dokes 3 hours ago. So sad. Local park demolished, replaced with parking lot. Anybody know where that local park is? Now, I live here in Falls Church, Virginia. Some of you are calling from as far away as actually the other side of the Atlantic. Some of you are in Louisiana or in Nevada, in Florida. So are we talking about your local park or my local park being replaced by the parking lot? Inside source. Who is this inside source? Who's John Dokes? I don't know him. City's sure to destroy at least 5 more this year. So what are some of the red flags? Well, somebody said it makes you mad. Exactly. Pay extra attention if a post makes you either gives you a strong positive or negative reaction, particularly a negative reaction, because you're more likely to get energized and send it on when you see something that gives you a negative reaction. It may create a false sense of urgency. It may say, there's a deadline, or we need to act now. Send this out to everybody you know. Get them on board. It tries to whip you up. It may contain typographical errors or a bunch of exclamation points, particularly in emails. It could have an outrageous headline, okay? It may claim that it's sharing inside information. That post about the parking lots said city source. Really? Or it may say, nobody's talking about this online. Well, there may be a reason why nobody's talking about it, because it may be bogus. And sometimes it just sort of reinforces your own worldview. So before you send it on, stop and think about it. Check it out. So finding and responding to news responsibly. We're going to take another poll while I talk a bit about what's happened in the past decade or so to newspapers. So here's the poll question. How many false local news sites popped up before the 2020 election? In the past 10 or 15 years, hundreds of newspapers around the country have folded or significantly cut back their circulation. The result of that has been what we call a news desert, so that particularly local news, you often can't get local news such as your city or county commission decisions, zoning decisions, other decisions. You might not even be able to get the high school basketball results. And as a result of that news desert, literally hundreds of false news sites have cropped up all over the country. Some of these are totally false news sites that are just made to promote advertising. Others are computer-generated sites with a bunch of biased reporting in there. And again, that could be to sway people one way or another. So, how many false news sites cropped up? According to the Tow Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia University, more than 1,200 websites pretending to be local news websites were created before the 2020 election. And that was about 3 times more than the 450 the previous year. So how do you identify what's a legitimate news site from those that may be bogus? Well, generally at the top of a story, a news story in particular, there is something we call the byline or the author name. Who's writing this? Do you know who that person is? If you don't, you can look them up. When was it published? It's amazing how much false information continues to circulate years and even decades after it was first put out, particularly in emails. Does the source have a good reputation? Well, I didn't know John Dokes, and often there are news sites that are putting these out. Some of them might be sites that you know and recognize. Others may be a little bit more obscure. For those that are obscure, you ought to be checking an About Us page. Legitimate ones should have that, which tell who these people are. And they often will have their corrections policy in case they get something wrong. And it should have original reporting in it. Who's being quoted, who's saying what, and what is the evidence that they are giving. Now, news and opinion are two very distinct items, and I want to talk about that just for a moment, because what we see, particularly in a newspaper, there is a whole page called the editorial page, which is usually the next to the last news page in the A section or the front section of a newspaper. Those are the editorial opinions of the news organization. On the page opposite that are columns or comments written by columnists or experts in the field. That's called the op-ed page. And then often throughout the newspaper, you may see columns, often with a person's picture in it, saying our view or commentary or just the person's name. These are opinion pieces, and they may have fact in them, but they are opinion. Online, there should be some words such as editorial, op-ed, our view, commentary, news analysis. It's sometimes more difficult to tell opinion pieces from fact online. Now, let's take a look. Verifying information. As I mentioned, one of the most pernicious forms of misinformation, I think, is emails. I get all kinds of emails, and even those from good friends who I love and trust sometimes contain misinformation. Here's a poll question. When was the first email sent? And it could have been 1969, 1990, 1971, or 1984. Let me tell you about two emails that I got recently while we're filling out this poll question. One was from a friend who had the good grace to at least say, this may not be true. And it was about a researcher in the West Coast who was doing a genealogy research. And she allegedly discovered that she had a long distant uncle whose first name was Remus, Uncle Remus, which may give a tip. And he was hanged allegedly as a train robber and a horse thief. And it turns out, according to this email, that this horse thief robber was also related to a prominent United States senator, and it even contained a supposed response from his office. Well, it turns out this is totally a bogus story that's been going around for about 30 years. And the names have been changed as to who the politician was, but it's been going around for a long time. Another email I got was reportedly comments that members of Congress had made to travel agents. And they were so incredibly ridiculous and geographically challenged that one might have to say, could any of this be true? For example, one supposed lawmaker complained that he couldn't see the ocean from his hotel room in Orlando, which is in the center of Florida. And his response was, I've seen Florida on a map and it's very narrow. Again, this was an email that has been circulating for about 30 years. Both of these were false. When you get an email that purports to give you some facts, check it out, okay? So what's the answer to this question? What year was the first email sent? The correct answer was 1971. And the bonus answer is, it didn't say anything. It was just gibberish. It did not say, what hath God wrought? Let me close this, okay. So here's 3 questions that you should ask yourself when you see online content. Who's behind the information? Do you trust this source? What's their evidence? What are they showing to prove that what they're saying is factual? And particularly when you see something that looks a little bit suspicious, what are other sources saying? Don't just believe the first thing you see. Check it out. Let's take a look at this post from the Neostar science group that says Mars to look as big as the moon tonight, once 1,200 years. I'm particularly interested in this post because you may remember 3 months ago, there were a lot of posts about the so-called Christmas star, which was a bright alignment of Saturn and Jupiter just over the horizon in the west, just a couple of days before Christmas. Let's take a look.
Your coworker Darnell shared a post for a once-in-a-lifetime astronomical event. You love staring up at the night sky and can't wait to tell your online group, the Space Gazers. But before you share the post and grab your telescope, you pause and think. Time to do some lateral reading and answer the 3 Stanford History Education Group questions designed to verify information. You know what they are. Your coworker is sometimes a little overeager on social media, yet you can see that 7,000 other people also shared the post. Who posted it originally? The Neostar science group. You've never heard of them, so you leave the post, open a new tab on your internet browser, and do a quick search. That's lateral reading. Skipping over ads in Neostar's own webpage, you visit a reputable wiki page. Content here is sparse, but it says the group has had a mixed reception and tends toward pop science. You don't write them off, but you do decide to gather more information. The post uses numbers and an image as evidence, but it also provides a link. You follow it. It takes you to the group's webpage, which uses scientific terms like heliocentric parabola distortions and cites light year data. Maybe you're starting to be convinced. Yet, you know despite your love of stargazing, you're not an astronomer, so you move laterally again. A keyword search gives you results. You scan the URLs and snippets to decide the best sources to review. A reputable news site talks about several internet hoaxes, including this one. More research from a national space organization says that though Mars will be closer, it won't look nearly the size of the moon. Looks like you found your answer, and a second source to corroborate it. It's a good thing you didn't share Darnell's post. You won't have time to investigate every online claim, but by asking questions and reading laterally, you can take responsibility for what you post. It's too bad about the Mars viewing, but it does look like a nice night. You know what to do.
Okay. By the way, the post about the Christmas star was actually accurate because Jupiter and Saturn were in alignment just before Christmas. I even took my telescope out and saw them in my lens. Okay. As the video mentioned, don't just click on the first thing you see because often the links at the top are either advertisements or they may be from the same source as you originally saw. So scroll down a little bit. Look for a site that you can trust. You might check a planetarium or an observatory or something like NASA or Sky and Telescope magazine, which has been around for over 100 years. Professional journalists look past the first page. Look for more than one source to see whether or not this was correct. The video also mentioned wikis. When they first started, there was a lot of skepticism about wikis because it seemed that anybody could go on and make any change and correction or add any information they wanted to a wiki. But over the years, wikis have become much more responsible, and it's much more difficult to make any changes or corrections in a wiki post, particularly something like Wikipedia. You can look for these images of the locks on an article to see if anybody can go in and change them. I worked at AARP for 10 years, and our fact checkers used Wikipedia a lot to check out sources as a first cut in seeing whether something was in fact true or not. And then one of the things about the wikis is they will cite specific sources for the information that they're quoting so that you can do further research. But what about images? You know, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words and seeing is believing. What about photographs? That email that I told you about the horse thief who was hanged, on some websites that I looked at to see about this article, you could actually see a photograph purporting to show his hanging. Well, all of us have probably used some form of photo enhancement program, such as Photoshop. I use it on almost every photograph I take to bring up the contrast and accentuate the colors a little bit. And people who are skilled at something like Photoshop know how to manipulate photographs. We all know that photographs are easy to manipulate. It's even easier to put a misleading caption like that one of Abraham Lincoln on a photograph. And because social media has now become so photocentric, almost every post has an image. But does the image necessarily go with the post? Not always. Even videos can be doctored. And if they're not doctored, they may be a real image, a real video, but it may not be related to what is being said in the post. So here's how you might check on photos.
Mischievous cats, failed casserole, and frozen canals, hundreds homeless. That is horrible. But photos can be edited or taken out of context. Time to investigate. Do a reverse image search. It's simple. Here's how it works using the Google Chrome search engine on a PC. Right-click on the image, select Search Google for image. Results. But like any search, don't just follow the first link you see. Instead, scan the results to find what you're looking for. Here's the photo. This looks useful. No frozen Venice this year, just a doctored image. Mystery solved. You can also reverse image search in other browsers, through websites, and on mobile devices. Now you can get back to those cat pics.
Okay. Now that video was about how to do an image search on a PC. If you're like me and you use a Mac, it's a little bit more difficult, but not that much. I generally do a screen grab of the image and then go to images.google.com. And you see in the search bar there's a little icon of a camera. Click on that and upload your image to that. And again, you'll get a search engine response to the image. So that's how you can do it on either a PC or a Mac. Again, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. Who's behind the information? Do you really trust this source? What is their evidence and what are other sources saying? Particularly if something looks a little bit hard to believe. Check it out. Don't just believe one source. So I've been telling you to check it out. Here's how you can do that. Here are some of the sources that you can use to check it out. Now we're going to be sending out an email after this program, which will include this list, or you can do a screen grab if you want right now. The one that I use the most is Snopes.com. And the reason I use that is that it's a general fact from fiction kind of a source. Some of these others are geared to either politics or science or current events or something like that. But Snopes is sort of the all-purpose general site for sorting out fact from fiction. So when I get something that I say, that just doesn't sound quite right to me, I'll go to Snopes first and check it out. Okay. We're also going to be sending out a survey. I believe the list is put in the chat box. We welcome your feedback on our session. Please complete the survey and send it in. That helps us fine-tune these programs. And now I'm going to open it up to Nancy and Trudy to see what comments or questions. Actually, I'd like to take questions first, Nancy and Trudy, and we'll worry about the comments a little bit later.
Okay, Larry, this is Trudy. I do have a question for you. Could you define what you mean by op-ed?
Yes. Generally in a newspaper, there is a page. It's usually the next to the last page of the A section in most major newspapers. It'll say editorial page. And often across from that page, there will be another full page, usually written by columnists, either conservative or liberal, or by experts in various fields. And that's called the op-ed page. And again, these are people's opinions. They are by columnists or experts. They're not necessarily, they may contain facts, but they are not just a factual story. They're somebody's opinion. So that's usually across from the editorial page. That's why it's called the op-ed page.
Okay, Nancy hasn't unmuted yet, so I'm doing question number 2. It came from our Facebook viewers, and that is, Larry, do you trust Wikipedia?
I do now, yes. Yes, because it is protected. And one of the things you'll see if you do a Wikipedia search is at the bottom, it will give it's almost like reading a college term paper, which has footnotes at the bottom of it. And it'll tell you where they are citing a fact and where they're citing that from, so that you can go back and further research what the article is saying. So yes, I do trust Wikipedia.
Very good. Larry, what's the difference between misinformation and disinformation?
You know, they're both pretty much the same thing, in my opinion. I think disinformation is more created to promote a false narrative. Misinformation may be somebody promoting something that they don't realize is misinformation. And I separate both of those from mistakes. I mentioned at the beginning of this comment about the beginning of this session that I ran across errors in stories that I was researching when I was working on this small little weekly newspaper in Montgomery County. All of us are human. We're going to make mistakes. But there's a difference between making a legitimate mistake, an inadvertent mistake, and putting out something that you know is wrong, and creating something out of whole cloth that you know is false. That's what I call disinformation. Hope that answered the question.
I think you did. Nancy, you want the next one? You want me to keep going?
There is one that is asking here, Larry. It is about, how do you recognize a fake video?
Well, you know, if something looks a little bit suspicious, you can go and do a search. For example, as the video said, you know, the video of the frozen canals. Just do a search for the topic. You know, you can. One of the best ways to do a search is to ask a question in a search engine, such as Google or any of the other search engines. Are the canals in Venice frozen, or have the canals in Venice froze? And usually they will bring answers and refer sometimes to the video or just sometimes generically. Any other questions or comments? How are we doing on time?
I have one question here. Could you define what you mean by a screen grab?
Yeah, and just about every computer is different as to how you do a screen grab, but a combination of keys. For example, if I used the Command and Shift and F3 or F4 keys, then I can take basically a photograph of what's on my screen at that moment, and it'll put it on my home page or on my desktop. Different computer systems use different ways to do it, so you might have to do a search to teach yourself how to do a screen grab. But it's a good tool to know. how to take a picture of what's on your screen.
Larry, we have a question from someone asking, I guess it's for your opinion of the caliber of journalists today. What is Larry's opinion on our journalist?
Well, they're all,
As a journalist yourself.
you know, I know a lot of journalists. Many of them are still working, and I've taught journalism for 15 years. I think the people who are coming out into journalism are incredibly dedicated and hardworking, and they're under a tremendous amount of pressure to produce and file accurate stories as quickly as they can. When I first started in journalism, as I said, I worked for a weekly newspaper, then I worked for a daily newspaper. That newspaper had a morning edition and an evening edition. I had 2 deadlines, one in the morning, one in the evening. Nowadays, and even when I was a reporter 15 years ago, there's tremendous pressure to be filing constantly. And the result is that more errors crop up in stories that are inadvertent errors. But I would say the quality of journalists is as good today as it's ever been.
Thank you.
Larry, the question is fact checking passé at today's newspapers?
I wouldn't say it's passé, but it has less, there are fewer fact checkers at most newspapers. That's one of the places where newspapers have cut. So newspapers are not fact checked as well as they used to be. They're not edited as well as they used to be. There has been a diminution on the editorial side. And sometimes editorials, the editors are all in a different location from the actual newsrooms. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's passé, but it's less frequent than it used to be. And again, as I mentioned, because now news is put out on the internet almost immediately, it often does not go through the same kind of fact-checking process as it used to. So it's not totally gone, but it's much more diminished. I have to say that when I worked for the AARP Bulletin and AARP, the magazine, we had the luxury of being monthlies, and we had a staff of fact-checkers, most of whom had either worked at the Washington Post or National Geographic or some other major news organization. And these people were incredible. They literally checked every word of every story. And I can't tell you how many times our fact checkers helped save me from putting something in a magazine that was wrong. That's why you don't see as many errors in these magazines.
Larry, what specific internet news websites, in your opinion, do you find most reliable? And what do you think of the accuracy of NPR?
I listen to NPR every day. I sometimes look at their website. I think they are highly professional, highly accurate. They try to be as unbiased as possible. I think most of the major news organizations try to present the news as factually as they can. One of the things that reporters have, no matter what newspaper they work for, is they have their own reputation, their own sense that, hey, what I write is going down under my name, and I need to make it as accurate as possible. So, I tend to use places like the New York Times and the Washington Post or local news organizations. I was checking something out that happened in Texas, and I looked at the Houston Chronicle, the Dallas News. So, I would say that most of the sites are highly credible.
Larry, next question is, what do you think of anonymous news or anonymous source news reports?
Anonymous source news reports and anonymous sources in a news report are 2 different things. Anonymous source news reports, I don't trust at all. Sometimes there are anonymous sources or sources who refuse to be identified. Let me tell you about some experiences that I had when I was covering Congress. There's a tradition in the Senate that if you quote somebody who is not a senator, the only person that you can quote by name is the senator's press aide or maybe a committee press aide. Others have to be identified as a Senate staffer, Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. That's just a sort of a rule in the United States Senate. So whenever I would be writing a story about something happening in the Senate, and sometimes it would be just an innocuous explanation of what is in a bill, I might have to say, according to a Senate source. I would often try to say a Democratic source or a Republican source to give you a little bit more of an understanding as to where we're talking about. The reason for anonymous sources is that people may feel more free to talk when they're anonymous. You take that with a grain of salt. You have to trust, where is that coming from? Now, often it may be close administration officials. There would be times when I would sit in the White House briefing room and a member of cabinet would come up and they would, before the session began, the press person would say, you can quote this person as an administration official, but you can't quote them by name. So even though it may have been the Secretary of Treasury or the Secretary of Commerce or whatever, you couldn't say who it was. You had to say a White House official. So sometimes these anonymous sources are built in. Other times they're used to allow people to speak more freely. But you have to realize somebody's, kind of giving their opinion and their spin on a story. Take it for what it's worth. Any others?
I'm looking now.
Larry, I have a question. Somebody asked if you could talk about why Wiki accepts donations. Are you able to speak on that topic?
I'm not.
Okay.
I suspect it's because, they do have some staff and, that helps keeps the lights on. But, I'm not an expert on Wiki except to know that, my people that I trust have used it and I've used it and have found it useful. Amber, what do you think?
I've gone through them. There are some other comments that are more commentary on people's opinions of different news channels, which I would wish not to get into.
Yeah, everybody has their opinion about the news sources they use or the news sources they trust or they don't trust. The message that I want to leave you with is when you see something online, don't necessarily send it on before you check it out to make sure in your own best knowledge that what you're sending on is true. Don't spread misinformation because you didn't take the time or the effort to check it out. So I thank you for joining us. I hope this was